All of our productions at GCTV are brought to you in part by People's United Bank, 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. C&S Wholesale Grocers is hiring in Hatfield and Brattleboro. Go to weselectthebest.com or click on the link at gctv.org for employment opportunities. The Arbors at Greenfield, assisted living community providing a unique balance of independence and personal care that offers residents and families the most precious gift of all, peace of mind. The Hammond family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com and check them out on Facebook. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. gcc.mass.edu. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield, call them at 774-3191, or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Franklin Community Co-op. Visit them at 144 Main Street in Greenfield or go online to franklincommunity.coop. Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all the productions at Greenfield Community Television.
Up here who can sort of demystify some of those myths that we hear about developing space for creatives. I should go back to my script a little bit. Space is an area that affects everyone in the creative industry. I always tell people when I first started out in photography, I would meet brides at Dunkin' Donuts. If we had some of these co-working spaces and shared office spaces when I started out, I think I would have been able to grow a lot faster and not have to sort of piecemeal my business together like I did. Now I have a studio and I can bring them there, and it's really easy to book a wedding because there's pictures everywhere and they sort of just recognize me as legit, whereas when you're doing it at Dunkin' Donuts with an iPad, it's a little less convincing. When it comes to developing these raw industrial spaces like places like Turner's and Holyoke have, we've run, a lot of the cities are running into walls. We're finding that the investment dollars don't match the sort of practicality of developing these spaces, so the return is just not there yet. When you come into problems with regulations and zoning and things that just make the project completely cost prohibitive. So we're here to talk about how we can use municipalities and state government to better that, but also find solutions to work around these issues that we can't change right immediately. Some of the things we've done in Holyoke to help mitigate these problems of developing these huge square footage spaces, our fire departments and building departments have been working with property owners to do phase implementation of projects. We received some money from the Mass Cultural Arts Link grant to do what we called the Code Service Program, which was a technical assistance program that hired an architect who is going to be on the panel today to review different spaces that wanted to transform into creative venues, and gave them some idea of how much that would cost and what they would have to do without having to invest their own money just to figure out what they want to do. So now the buildings have a somewhat of a base plan of what can be done there without having to invest money in what we call a Chapter 34 right away without knowing what direction you want to go in. So Kerry will be here, and hopefully that will come up. And the other thing we've been doing is the money side of things, which is the tax incentives, the TIF programs. So Holyoke has all this extra mill space. We run into these problems of the financing not being able to develop it because of rules like a 30% rule you'll hear about, and we're going to talk about how we can get not around these things, but how we can change the laws and how we can work within the laws to develop these spaces. Let Let me see, back to my script real quick. So we've got questions sort of in the can, but we'd rather get the questions from you guys. So the questions we've come up with are sort of our fallback, and if we have to fall back to them, we will, but they're sort of poised in these three areas. And that's the assessing community needs and strengths, the nitty-gritty of the zoning and the coding issues that you're going to run into, and then the real mover and shaker, and that's the money and financing. So think of those three areas are kind of what we want to tackle. If there's stuff beyond that and outside of that, please bring it up. We don't have a microphone, so we're just going to have to yell, but just fine. It's a small enough room, a small enough group where I think we can do that. So before we get into our panel, because I see our moderator has arrived, so I'm off the hook, I want to introduce Umberto, is it Crenca? Crenca. See, we both have one of those last names where the C's do the wrong things. Yeah. So, yeah. Bert is the founder and artistic director of AS220 in Rhode Island. It's an unjuried, uncentered, all-ages forum and home for artists located in Providence. If you have not heard about AS220, I highly recommend you get on the line and look it up. It's an amazing, I'd say space, but now it's spaces. They own at least three. Last time I was there, it was 3 buildings in downtown Providence. And they've completely transformed the neighborhood over the course of the last 30 years now. So they're a model for the nation of how to make an art space work, and also, I think, a good example of letting the community dictate what it wants, and not trying to impose our own artistic visions on somebody else. Bert himself is a visual and performing artist and a musician with a long exhibition and performance history. He's got permanent collections in RISD and the Newport Art Museum. He performed at the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, Scotland, in a band called Panic Band. He's traveled all over Europe, all over the world. We were just talking about his trip to New Zealand recently. He's a resident of Providence, where he maintains a studio and exhibition space, and he is currently doing experimental music in the ensemble group Monkey Head. Bert visited Holyoke for the first time today. I'm so mad I wasn't able to be there, but I know he'll be back now that he's seen it once, because he said he saw a place he needs to perform with his band, and I'm looking forward to that. So Bert has a short presentation about AS220. We'd like to familiarize you with it, but afterwards, go on your own and check this place out. It's amazing. Bert.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Jeff's absolutely right. I was in Holyoke earlier today, and I fell in love. Tremendous assets, and I've also been characterized as a person who's never seen an abandoned building he didn't fall in love with, so I don't know what all that means. Jeff has charged me with giving you 30 years of history in 10 minutes, which is not just the history of our organization, but the evolution and transformation of an entire city. Providence has gone through a remarkable renaissance over the last 30 years, like unprecedented, I think, in some ways. So let's get started. You're going to lose some of the context because I just don't have the time. But just remember that in 1985, let's see if we can handhold this. I need an engineering degree to figure out how to unwrap it. But, in 1985, when AS220 started, Providence was essentially an abandoned city. Okay, it was completely unoccupied, the downtown. People referred to it as the armpit of New England, and people drove through and away. Okay, that's not fair. You got advance notice there. Oh no, put the lights. We need the lights off. Lights off. All right. No, we're good. So AS, Alternative Space, Art Space, 220 Way Boston Street, started in 1985 with $800. This is our vision statement, which took us 10 years to achieve consensus on, literally. And this is our mission statement. AS220 was founded, and the concept was developed because of an exhibit I did in 1982 that was panned by a local reviewer. The work was very political, and the panning was so severe that tons of artists came to the exhibit. We started meeting. We wrote a manifesto trashing everything in the art world as being elitist and Western European. including art schools, art institutions, funders, and every other thing. And that ended up getting published. And then people started to say, how would you do it different? And we did a thing, an unjuried, uncensored exhibit. Then I went off to Europe and came back and decided I needed to do something. So if you've seen the original manifesto, which we don't have time for, you'll see that this mission statement is very reflective of that original manifesto. So these are the 3 buildings that we own before. They were derelict buildings, essentially abandoned. If you look in the top left, which was our first building, you'll notice that if you notice the buildings behind it, they were also derelict. These buildings, when I show you the next pretty picture, represent $25 million of investment in the downtown area before anybody had ever conceived of investing at that point in the downtown area. And that top left building was our first building. Now, there have been multiples of that $25 million invested all around us, as you can imagine. The street that first building was occupied on was all drug trade and sex traffic, and porn stores and everything else, and the building was horrific. This is part of what the future represents. In addition to those 3 buildings, we are in a purchase and sales agreement on this strip club. We will be turning this into a state-of-the-art performance venue, and it will be the last of the sex trade in downtown Providence. So we're very excited about this. We also have another 18,000 square foot building that's land banked, that we will create another mixed-use, mixed-income development out of. That's a gateway to an underserved community across the street from 3 of the major high schools in the city. We can talk a little bit about that. A little bit about programs. So this gives you an overview of our programs. I think I should, before I even get into the programs, some of the fundamental overarching policies of the organization that are going to be a little shocking. The unjuried, uncensored mission to this day, 30 years later, anybody and everybody gets an opportunity to perform or exhibit at ASU 20 from the state of Rhode Island. Now, people from the outside, and we have people from all over the world performing, exhibiting, it's a little bit of a different criteria, and they have to jump through a few hoops. We wouldn't be able to serve the whole world in the same way, but it's certainly not about content, ever. Okay, that just happens. Also, another policy of ASU 20 that you may find a little bit shocking, particularly now that Raul Castro has abandoned me, we have an equal pay policy. So Raul doesn't have an equal pay policy anymore in Cuba. So I thought we had some sort of relationship there. But anyway, so, and I've been to Cuba, actually. So, equal pay policy. So I'm the founder and director of ASU 20, and I make the same wage as Marina, who's only been with us for 6 months or so. Okay, healthcare, we try to do right by employees. We have 60 employees, 30 part-time, 30 full-time. All right, and we started with $800 in an illegal space in an abandoned building in the city. We got the electric. We used kerosene heaters. 7 of us lived there, and we just moved into this space. We started doing performances and exhibits, and then after a little bit of a while, the city visited us because they began to read reviews of things that were going on, and they said there's no permits. There's no building inspectors, no health inspectors, no fire marshals have ever been through the building, and they don't have an entertainment license. What the hell is going on? Right? And there's a long story about how we worked through all of that with the city, but my favorite anecdotal story was when we got it going on the ground level, on the ground floor, once we get started, somebody wanted to open a club on the ground floor. They were doing it legally. They had to have a liquor license, all that. They were bringing the plumbing inspectors in that day, and we had run 40 feet of PVC pipe across the basement up to the top floor, and PVC pipe is not legal as a water feed. So he said, they're going to see the 40 feet of pipe, they're going to know you're there, they're going to give me a hard time, what are you going to do? We said, give us a minute. We ran up to our studio, we mixed paint to look like copper, we came downstairs, we painted the pipe, and we added dust along the top and aged it a bit. So one of the greatest theatrical performances of my life, the plumbing inspector never saw the pipe. So when you ask me, how did you do AS 220? You know, so a little bit about the programming. 5 galleries, they're booked monthly. And there's about a 3.5-year waiting list to get into gallery, which is unfortunate. And we are looking to find a way to address that. When we first opened the Unjuried Uncensored Space, not even the artists and musicians thought that this was a place they necessarily wanted to participate in, because at that time they were of the mindset that they wanted to be picked. Right? Where's the prestige if anybody can play or perform here? Until somebody started coming, like I said, my boyfriend plays rock and roll guitar and I do performance and we stand on our head spitting nickels. Nobody else will let us do it. Can we do it here? All right? And I'm going to refer to that again a little bit later when I get into more of the philosophical side of what we do. Live arts, we have 4 live arts venues. They're all tiny, very intimate. Our black box, our main performance space, a thing we call the psychic reading room, which is a really tiny space and is extremely popular, actually. And everything and anything that you can imagine. We do, just in our main stage, we do about 12 different performances a week. Okay, 400 to 500 events in the course of a year. Our national award-winning youth program, we work with kids in juvenile detention. Any kid who's involved with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families automatically gets into our youth program. We work in every discipline with these kids you can imagine, from digital formats to black and white photography to dance, hip-hop, visual arts. We do mural commissions. And frankly, it's been very difficult to keep funded because it's completely reliant on public funding. ASU 20 is 60% earned income and 40% contributed income from all the variety of tenants and whatnot that we have. You'll see more about that. And then our industries. So ASU 20 was very, very, very much on the front end of all this whole maker culture idea and hacker spaces and all that. So we have a fab lab, makerspace that has all of the suite of tools, the laser cutters, CNC routers, all that kind of stuff. And we're also in partnership with MIT. So we're in a network of fab labs all over the world through MIT. And we have the Fab Academy, which is a 6-month tuition-based program where people from all over the world have come to Providence for 6 months to learn the suite of equipment. They are taught by a local teacher under our employ, and they are taught remotely by Neil Gershenfeld from the Center of Bits and Atoms in MIT. And this past year, a year ago, I was asked to speak at the Fab 10 conference in Barcelona about our work, because in some ways we're one of the more truly accessible fab labs in the world. So they like to show us off. And there's also a print shop and a media arts. This is a little bit about the fab, more images of the Fab Academy. The print shop has etching presses, litho presses, offset presses, letter presses, silk screening, and there's a variety of ways that you can become a participant in any of our industries. You can be a key member where you pay a monthly fee and then you're part of a decision-making body. A lot about ASU 20 is access and community engagement, and how do we engage community and how do we get them to be shaping and invested in the programs of ASU 20. We have a whole variety of strategies to do that. Then our live workspaces. We have over 50 artists in residence in 3 types of living. There's about 9 market rate, and the other 40-something are affordable. You have to be below a certain income. You have to have a passion for making. It's not about quality. It's about showing a commitment. Okay, so it's difficult for an 18-year-old to compete against a 60-year-old in terms of portfolio, but they certainly can compete in terms of expressing their passion and demonstrating their passion, and why living in the AS community right now is going to make a difference. So there are 3 types of living. There's the down below, there are 12 communal live spaces with shared kitchens and bathrooms like a dormitory, echoing our original community who we had, and we never want to lose that or the challenge that comes with it. And then in the top, let me see, oh boy, now I'm confused. But the other loft spaces, so one building has 400 to 500 square foot open loft spaces, and then the next building has 800 to 1,100 square foot loft spaces. People literally have gone from the communal living to the medium size to the large size. There's a parking lot next to it. I'm planning on building a graveyard there so we can just push them out the window, and we'll make those beautiful monuments like in Paris and Montmartre or wherever they are, and we'll, and that'll be an attraction. And then Our projects are truly mixed-use, mixed-income developments. So we have other businesses in our ground-level market rate spaces, but we also run our own restaurant. ASU20 is a nonprofit with 6 for-profit corporations under its umbrella. Our bar and restaurant is one of them. The others were insisted upon because of the use of federal, historic, and new market tax credits in our projects. None of these projects could work without tax credit subsidy. Tax credits on our buildings, on our second 2 buildings, accounted for about 50% of the build-out cost of those buildings, and that's cash equity, right? Or we could not make these spaces affordable. They would not work without that kind of subsidy. So, tax stabilization, tax incremental financing, tax credits, all of these kinds of programs are critical. And if you don't have them, lobby for them. And then, tons of things going on. But then we have also, in the mix of the 400 or 500 performances, events, and 100 gallery exhibits we do every year, we do a food fest. We shut down the street. We have a big festival, over 20 live acts, food vendors. We have a big maker fair, is what you see on the right. That's in collaboration with Make Magazine. We're one of the many maker fairs around the country, showcasing all of these new technologies and all of the applications there's of that. And just to give you a little sense of the yearly activity at ASU20, and this is no exaggeration. If anything, it's conservative. $5,000 artists perform, okay? And what we sell is sustainability through engagement. And what is engagement, right? So if you're delivering a product that the community values and you have ways of making that accessible to them, how can you not sustain yourself, right? Because if in crisis, they will rally, and they have over the last 30 years, right? And when we talk about sustaining creative communities, what are the basics? Affordable space to live, affordable space to create, affordable space to perform, to exhibit, right? And that third place, which could be a cafe, a coffee shop, where they don't push you out the door in 30 minutes, and they have artwork, original artwork hanging on the walls, right? People need to commune. You have to have those opportunities and create those opportunities for incidental interactions. So much comes from those, creating those kinds of opportunities. Knowledge, artists need and are starved for knowledge. Of all of these makers in this room, you know and I know, you're always trying to learn. You're always learning new techniques. You're always trying to inform your work by experiences and by research. And the more you make that kind of available, tools and technology, access to tools and technology, right? And of course, that third place is represented when we say other people. So our cafe and bar is sort of the portal of ASU20. We on any given day, we have green-haired, tattooed and unwashed rockers mixing with city officials in suits who want to be seen there, mingling with this. Or our hip-hop kids from upstairs, all mingling in that one area, in that portal, in that hub, right? So this is my little cheeky animation that you're going to have to suffer through. So this idea, art culture, a means to an end or a means to a means. So we have seen developers, and we're talking about it here. We're talking about it in Holyoke. We're talking about these different places about how we did it with Mass Mocha, right? Or maybe we did, maybe we didn't, right? So how do we create our communities are ever changing. It's not something you do and you're done. Demographics change, right? Technologies and the needs of that community change. So how do we keep art and culture people and thinkers of that type embedded in with a level of permanency? And how do we make room for the next generation of brats that want to challenge us and sort of and continue to keep us fresh, right? So a means to an end or a means to a means. So the guy in Brooklyn who bought all those buildings in Dumbo brought all the artists in, told them very, very transparently, you're not here forever, I'm using you, but when will you ever have access to space like this at this price? And within 30 minutes, that entire area of Brooklyn got turned over, but the artists got driven out. So how do we think more strategically, both from the municipal side and policy side, to be able to create permanency? Because we want artists and makers to be inspiring us forever. So what do we build on? Physical space, right? Accessible space, available space, affordable space, right? In the mix. And of course, we can't talk about the future without claiming virtual space, right? We know that this has served artists tremendously. Artists have been able to build careers in that virtual space in ways that they never were before, and were completely dependent on the sort of commercial and sort of industry folks to make them famous or make them rich or anything like that. Now artists have the means and the tools and the power, not only just to be able to make careers for themselves, but what an incredible marketing tool, right? In any ideas. And then this conceptual space, and this is the one we don't talk about too much. So 30 years ago, Providence would have never, ever dreamed of calling itself the creative capital. That's its subtext now. It's called Providence, the creative capital. Unimaginable. That would have been like imagining walking to the moon. Never mind flying there, to think that. So what is that about? Changing the consciousness of a community, making art and culture an expectation, right? Not a decoration, not an add-on, but actually this is the quality of life that I want, right? And how does that language change? So it was epitomized to me one day when I'm sitting out in front of my cafe, and I'm almost done. I'm sitting outside my cafe, and there's a couple in their 70s walking up the street, heading to the theater, dressed to the nines, and the woman says to the gentleman next to her, "That's AS220, where anything goes." With a sense of ownership and pride. I don't know if she'd ever been in AS220, but it occupied a place here. And the fact that we had an unjuried and uncensored environment that meant that when artists went back to their studio, whatever they did, whatever their imagination would allow, there was a place where they could do it. It changes everything, okay? So that's the conceptual space. So thinking about this kind of creative placemaking and thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay? So this is sort of Maslow's, Umberto's, and AS220's hierarchy of needs. And it actually mirrors Maslow's if you think of it. Because on the ground level, Maslow talks about those very fundamental physical needs, right? To shelter, food, those kinds of things. And the conceptual is way up here. Because if you don't have something in your belly, how can you be there? Right? Well, it's very similar in a kind of environmental way, right? And then conditional and intentional. Oh, you didn't see that one yet. Conditional and intentional. So we know that when I drive into Holyoke and I start drooling over the buildings, Marina can testify, right? We know that the conditions are ripe. There's a lot of space. There are also other kinds of assets. You have these rivers and parallel motion. I mean, what is this, Amsterdam? Where am I? Right? I mean, it's really quite remarkable. The scale of the city, the fact that all the architecture is still standing for the most part. Right? These are amazing assets to be able to build on. So the conditions are there. There's an eagerness to see it evolve and to grow, and there's some visioning, amazing visioning going on. Marcos has become a dear friend, right? Then there's the intentional. So we can talk about the guy in Brooklyn who was very intentional. The conditions were there, and he was very intentional. But it goes back to art and culture as a means to an end, not as a means to a means, as the way that we continue to reimagine, re-envision, and inspire ourselves, right? So, I mean, Bobby Seals used to say that the Black Panthers were a social historical accident, right? That the conditions were ripe for something like that to grow out of a community in Oakland with a bunch of young men who wanted to make change, right? But now we have this incredible opportunity and this knowledge to be able to think bottom up and top down, right? And what do I mean by that? What bubbles under the surface? Whatever rock shows that are going on in illegal spaces, you know, whatever people who are inventing maker spaces in little loft spaces that are barely heated, or any of that, the bottom up, right? So, and then the top down, the foundations, the municipal community, this starts to think, then you start thinking about coding and zoning and all of these things. How can we, certainly we're not looking to put people at risk, right, in terms of health safety code and things like that. But at the same time, is there room for creativity? And it needs to be a conversation and not an antagonistic relationship, but a supportive and communication and thing. And that's what we managed. We had to show them that that was possible, and we had to build a certain level of credibility. But don't you think that the next space, the Steel Yard, the Dirt Palace, all the other amazing things that are happening in Providence now, don't you think that once they seen what AS220 did, that the conversation changed with them? And that the building department was more receptive to the possibility and the idea, and we can be more thoughtful about that. And we can make it happen before it turns into an antagonistic relationship, right? And we call this scaffolding for success. And what I mean by that the big catch thing is entrepreneurship, innovation, all of this stuff, design, right, all of this. Every community wants to get on that wagon, but really, my fear is that we don't know how to scaffold for that. Where do those designers want to live? What kind of environment do they want to live in? And I'm suggesting that if you create a very strong art community and culture community, that becomes to develop the environment where people want to be. And designers are restricted by the market and the demands of the market. The chair has to be this light, it has to be this color, it had to be made to recycle. Now, design me a chair. Artists have none of those restrictions. And that's where I want to be as a designer, in that milieu. Richard Flower has certainly talked about this, but then he has his strengths and weaknesses as his critics. But I think there is something to it, and I'm just about done. We call this compost theory. Composting. Creating a fertile, nurturing environment. How many times have you created a compost and suddenly some plant grows that you've never even seen in your yard before? Because the environment is so inviting and so rich. And then you need to create opportunities for these young people and stuff to find a way into the conversation as well, because they're the ones that are going to turn it over. So to make sure it's aerated, right? So that's my talk. Thank you very much, and I probably went over.
All right, I think we found next year's keynote. So I'm going, I don't care that you ran over, Bert. We still have an hour for the panel, which is great. So I'm going to go quickly through this introduction for Aaron Vega, my state representative, my state rep, my friend, my former city councilor, and my yoga instructor, Aaron Vega. That's it. Everybody else should know you already.
Good afternoon, everybody. Bert, when you're ready to open up AS220 North, you come right up to Holyoke. We got your space for you, for sure.
You already have somebody that's ready to do that.
Excellent.
I don't know who they are, but you have one.
I know one of the guys is right here. I'm glad to see my web designer here. Glad to see one of my friends who stuck his neck out there and bought a building in Holyoke. And I'm sure we'll hear from him if you haven't already. So we're here today. I just want to I'll be on script for a second here. I want to thank all of you for coming to discuss this crucial topic, which directly affects the success and growth of the creative economy in Western Mass. And we're all gathered here in the mecca of creative economy and urbanism of Greenfield. That's okay. I'd like to also thank the summit's organizers. Okay. Well, you want to be real close. All right.
Don't be afraid of it.
I'm not afraid of it. You just don't need the microphone. So I'd like to thank the summit's organizers, the Fostering Arts and Cultural Project, the EDC of Western Mass, and all the partners of the Creative Economy Network for putting together this organization today, this panel, this event, and sponsoring businesses and organizations that are here, and of course for Greenfield Community College for hosting. So I'm glad you all found your way to this panel and to this room. I'll just say briefly, because I want to get to the panel and get to hopefully a nice discussion. And I think that Bert sort of talked about it. I mean, there is a collaboration between the private and public sector. Whether we want to admit it or not, whether we want to say we hate politics or we don't like politics, whatever it may be, the truth of the matter is that we're wrapped up in politics, and the truth of the matter is that if you're going to be doing opening spaces in cities, there is zoning, there are laws, there are rules. Whether we can kind of bend them, get a little bit of flexibility, maybe take a little bit longer to get things up to code, there needs to be a partnership. And I was really glad to hear that 25 years ago, it's probably a lot easier to take over spaces and do things like paint PVC pipe, look like copper. A little bit harder to do nowadays, but I think there's still ways that we can work with the private and public partnership. At the state level, I want to let people know that if you don't already know, the legislature is definitely on board with a lot of what's going on in the creative economy, worker space, arts and culture. It's the executive branch you got to worry about, the governor's side of things. The House of Representatives and the Senate are on board and do a lot of initiatives and a lot of programs around the creative economy, including getting money to an organization called Mass Development, which works on transformative development, works on creative spaces, works on getting money to people who own buildings and gets money into communities. So we get it, even though we walk around in suits a lot of the time, we actually, a lot of us do understand it. And there's 3 committees you may want to be interested in at the state level. That's the Arts and Culture Committee. There's a committee on economic development and emerging technologies, and there's a committee on tourism. So these 3 committees kind of are stake in the ground of what it means to make sure that communities out in Western Mass have a say in what's going on in economic development, tourism, and arts and culture. Out here in Western Mass, tourism is the 5th biggest industry, and that includes art galleries, museums, performances. So it's really critical that we make sure that we recognize that and utilize that as an asset to all of our communities. Today we want to talk specifically in this panel about space with innovators who have transformed former industrial buildings, like you saw, into new venues for art, entertainment, and entrepreneurship. I look forward to hearing from all of your thoughts on this because I'm here to learn as well as sort of moderate this conversation. And we will address issues of zoning, legal regulations, and ways local government can encourage private investment in places like gateway cities. Like Greenfield's not a gateway city, is it? So that's okay. We love Greenfield. It's a beautiful place. We have a great panel. We've already met Bert. He doesn't need an introduction. That was a great presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing more from him, but I also want to invite Kerry Dietz up too. Kerry, come on up. I'm going to truncate the bios just a little bit so we can get into Kerry Dietz is a principal architect at Dietz & Company in Springfield. She founded the company over 30 years ago and has become the region's largest architectural firm, wanting to ensure that the work she did would make a difference. Kerry continues to create architecture that also serves the community. And I think that's really critical, as we heard, as things grow and expand. We've heard the stories of what's happened in the East Village of New York. We know what happens maybe in Northampton, Massachusetts, perhaps, if anybody knows that area. Artists came in, revitalized all these great spaces, and then suddenly within 5 to 10 years, they're priced out. So how do we keep vibrant neighborhoods of people that maybe make 6 figures next to people that are struggling artists? I think that's what makes a vibrant community. Seth Lepore. Seth, come on up. Yeah, he was the one fixing the microphone for me. All right, Seth is here. Seth is the performing artist and teacher at CoLab at Easthampton, a membership-based collaborative workspace aimed at connecting, engaging, and enabling creative individuals and entrepreneurs. Seth travels around the United States both solo and collaboratively. The pieces he does serve as an empathetic mirror of the culture in order to create new perspectives of understanding with the high focus of balancing humor, a balance between humor and high focus on understanding the perspectives of the new creative economy. Okay, so that's interesting. He's a writer and musician as well, and I'm just going with this, so I'm interested to hear what Seth is going to say. He's from Easthampton, so we love Easthampton, right over the hill. And it's more than once?
Yeah, since
All right.
I was 17.
Excellent. And we have one more person up here, Evan Plotkin. Come on, Evan. Evan is the president of Properties and Facilities Management at NAI Plotkin, a Springfield-based real estate brokerage and management company that has been in business in the local area for half a century. Evan has extensive expertise in all aspects of real estate brokerage and property management, including commercial office buildings, medical office buildings, industrial buildings, shopping centers, and condominiums management. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. And I just want to say one more thing. I think that what we're experience in Holyoke is unique in many ways, but also being mirrored in a lot of the other gateway cities and other communities across Massachusetts and New England and really nationally. And one of the things that how we have to balance out, I think, is the ability to collaborate in and around our community, but also in a bigger sense, because there's only so many creative economy businesses that are coming to Massachusetts. There's only so many artists that can actually make a living perhaps doing art. There's only so many buildings that have space that can be renovated. And so we have to make sure that we share best practices. And there is a Gateway Cities caucus that travels across the Commonwealth, looking at different practices throughout the Commonwealth to sort of see how we can work together. So I'm open to starting with one of these questions, but I'd rather turn it right over and exactly have... What's a gateway city? Gateway City is a it's a designation. There were originally 11 gateway cities. There are now 26. Using the sort of format that we saw on that triangle and the diamond earlier, on the base ground, Gateway City is a community between 35,000 and 125,000 people that has an unemployment rate higher than the state average and a graduation rate lower than the state average. So, it's not a good thing. You don't want to be a gateway city. Conceptually, on the top of the triangle, gateway cities are cities that originally were places where immigrants and migrants came to. They are our old mill towns. So Fall River, New Bedford, Holyoke, Chicopee, Westfield. They were these places where entrepreneurship and new businesses started, but due to urban suburbanization and due to industry leaving New England, going south, and then finally out of the country, these are our dilapidated cities. So I always say gateway cities is a nice way of saying rundown mill town. So good question, because we use that word a lot, gateway cities. And the reason why that's important for those of us that live and work in gateway cities is that there are a lot more incentives from the state for these gateway cities. As an example, we created a job creation incentive program where if you have a business, you create a job, you get a $5,000 tax credit, going back to tax credits, which are critical. New market historic and state historic tax credits are critical for supporting new development. But we created a job incentive program, so any company in the Commonwealth that creates a job, they get a $5,000 tax credit. You're in a gateway city, it's $10,000. So it's those kind of incentives that we try to bring sort of a laser focus on these typically urban areas that need more addressed and more focus on development.
I do want to make a distinction, though. I find that they tend to be more of the rundown mill cities, not towns, because places like where I live in Easthampton, we can't touch money that gateway cities can get. So, and then you go into some more of the even smaller towns like Turner's and whatnot that need that have all of those mills that could be converted as well. They can't really touch some of the money that some of these gateway cities are getting, which is also, it's a great example of being able to use the model of the gateway city to see what happens so that money can be redistributed to some of these other places. But we're all trying to do a lot of the same things.
It's a great point, because the places like Easthampton, Gardner, that have a lot of the same issues of, say, Holyoke, Fall River, New Bedford. That's why that population distinction, I think, because the pie is only so big. So we start splitting it up. Because again, when there was 11 gateway cities originally, there was a little bit more funds that could go into those cities. Now there's 26. So obviously we're not supporting all 26 communities as we can. Yes, sir.
There are smaller towns in Western Mass who were never mill towns. If anything, they were tobacco fields that need money for basic infrastructure, like sewers and a lot of towns, broadband. Fiber goes to the town, nobody can afford to connect it to the houses and businesses.
Absolutely.
We need something from Boston.
We need a lot. We do. There was there was a bond bill that had broadband expansion throughout the Commonwealth, including Western Mass, to get to the hill town. So that's definitely another whole topic of conversation for sure. Another question over here.
How did it go from originally 11 gateway cities to 26?
I'd really like to get back to space. I know you guys want to talk about gateway cities.
I can do that one quick. Unfortunately, because when that criteria was created 5 or 6 years ago, unfortunately, as the economy got worse, more cities qualified. So the unemployment rate and the dropout rate were the reasons why. But yes, back to space, because that's what we're here to talk about. Are there any? The one question I'm actually going to go off script or off. I want to actually hear from Bert. I mean, what's happening now at S220, AS220 is just amazing, and I think everyone just thought it was amazing and it was great. But that didn't happen overnight. You weren't doing 4,500 performances. You weren't having. I mean, and you weren't probably working with the teens and the youth that you were in the first couple of years. How did that manifest?
You're right. We're 30 years old,
Right.
and it grew very, very organically, including the knowledge needed to be able to figure out and sort of decode a lot of what it takes to make all of this happen. My personal background, I had no experience or nothing in my history that led me to think that I could accomplish this. People say, could you imagine where AS220 is when you started? Of course not. It wasn't in the realm of experiences, and there wasn't anything modeled for me that made it happen. So it was one step at a time. I mean, I'll give you a real simple example. It's like I was saying it at lunch today. It was like somebody said, "Oh, you're a nonprofit." I said, "Yeah." They said, "When did that happen? How'd that happen?" I said, "Somebody came up to the space one day and said, you know, if you become a 501c3, you can get some money." And I heard money. And they left, and I turned around to my friends and I said, somebody said if we become a five-something, some letters thing, we can get some money. Let's find out about that thing, right? And that's how we became a five. And then I learned and did the research, right? So now this entire vocabulary that I have about development and stuff like that, I didn't have any experience with that. So it's very, very organic, and I think a lot of the staying power of the organization and the sustainability. But there's only one other comment I want to make. It's very difficult. You know, we counsel people from all over the world, actually, in this work. And there are a lot of settings that we realize that our work is not possible because everything is top-down. I had a conference call with a woman from Kuwait who wanted to model something at AS220. I said, we're an unjuried and uncensored space. How does that play in Kuwait? You know, and she says, well, anything criticizing religion is off the table. You know, I can't guarantee results without the associated values, the access, the sort of equal pay policy. Now, certainly there are different elements of AS220 that you can draw from and can inform somebody's project or thing, but I can't guarantee results if it isn't built on a certain set of values. So,
I want to come back to Seth in a moment, but I want to go into the space issue kind of directly and ask Kerry and Evan, what are the techniques for assessing the community's needs and strengths, and how do you determine what's a right project for a community? Because we may sit back and say, I want AS220 in my backyard tomorrow, but is that a reality? Or I want to have condominiums, or I want to have this because I think that needs to be market rate housing in Holyoke. But maybe what are the assets? How do you determine from your two perspectives?
Okay, I'll start with that. Well, I'm as much as I'm a commercial real estate guy, I'm maybe a different sort of breed of that.
I can speak to that.
Anyone who knows me will know that I've taken a sort of a different tact on space, and much to the chagrin of some of my partners who are, more traditional commercial real estate brokers and investors, they say, why is Evan going off in this wild direction, and what is he doing? Come back, Evan, they say to me. But I think that now, I mean, they used to say that a while ago, but I think it's changed a bit because we've had success. And I would say that the way that I kind of look at space is I see it everywhere. When you're in commercial real estate, everywhere you look, there's space. Mm-hmm. And, I not only see buildings, but I see what's in between buildings. And I see what's on the sidewalk and what's happening on the sidewalk. And sometimes in those spaces, I don't see people. In Springfield, which has been in decline for quite some time, there's a lack of people on the sidewalk. And when there's no people on the sidewalk, retail businesses don't typically want to be there because they basically look at how many people walk by a particular. I mean, my grandfather, God bless him, was the one who coined 100% location, the terminology that you use in those days he would actually count how many people walk by a particular street corner at 12 noon, and he would count them, and he had some kind of a formula for figuring out whether that was 100% or a 90% or an 80% location. And, but anyway, I digress a little bit. Point is that my thought about how to deal with the problem of the population in a city that largely stays in their office, goes to the food court, back into the garage and gets their car and drives out of Dodge. They don't use the street because there's a lack of retail, there's a lack of things going on. I'm talking about Springfield right now. And so that became really, because I have investments in the city, I have properties that I own and manage for others, and the task that I have as a commercial real estate guy is to lease space and to make the properties economically viable. And over and over again, you would have site selectors coming to me and saying, we think this building is great. You do a great job managing it. It's beautiful. The economics make sense. But you know what? My employees don't want to live or don't want to work in Springfield. They don't want to come here. And I said, well, okay. But, and so we'd walk around. I'd actually would meet with the employees of a company, a large company, and I'd walk around Springfield with 30 or 40 people trying to sell them on the downtown. So it became much more than just trying to lease an office space or sell a building. It was about selling a downtown. It was about selling my city. And so that started me on the road to looking at how we need to do that. And the word and the term that I use is activation. I didn't coin that term, but it's one that I use a lot. And I look at every empty space and place as an opportunity. And so several years ago, I bought a Class A office building, 360,000 square foot Class A office building that had a 34% occupancy. And I did a series. The first things that I did were I looked at this plaza that had it used to have a fountain that was now abandoned. Basically, there was nothing else in this outdoor plaza. And the plaza looked out onto a park, which was a historic park in Springfield, Court Square, with a church, and it's one of the most beautiful spaces I've ever seen. But nobody's there. Very rarely is it used. And so it just occurred to me that if I activate my plaza, then we can then activate Court Square more, and we can start to create some energy on the street. And we could start drawing people outside, getting them out of the offices. And that's basically what I did. Without getting too much into more detail, I brought music, brought art, sculpture, galleries, I did many different exhibits, live performances out onto this plaza, but benches out there. What a novelty in Springfield. A frickin' novelty in Springfield that people can sit down in a park. Wow. And I actually had a debate with the mayor about that and some other people, and they just wouldn't hear from me. They said, no, we don't want benches. So I went out and I bought 15 benches and I put them in my plaza. And I said, I'm going to show you what happens. And that plaza now, if you go there, I think you'll see what I'm talking about, that people come out and they hang out. I have music out there, and this is during the lunch hour, and people, but now there's interaction. And that's where collaboration and innovation takes place, with people are out on the sidewalk and on the street. So 5 years later, I've leased up, the building's almost 80% occupied now, over 150,000 square feet I've leased. The property is now generating cash flow for my investors. The bank is off my back, and it's a success. And so I've done, but what I realized is that it isn't all about this plaza, my lobby, which I also activated. I created a gallery on the 9th floor, a 10,500 square foot gallery and studio space. I do shows for artists. I have a lot of different kinds of performances and activities and fundraisers and you name it going on in the building. And it's really created an energy in the space. And so I basically felt that you need to I created this economic model in my own mind anyway, and it worked. So why not do this somewhere else? And where else can we do it? And anyway, that's it for now. I'll let Kerry go on from there.
So I'm more pragmatic. No, I don't know if pragmatic's the right word, but we don't create space. Is my mic on? Probably not. Is it on now? No? Talk into it. Is that better? Okay.
I don't think it's on. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, just pull.
Okay. All right. I'll take it. Oh, yeah. That's all the difference. Yeah, that's
Get
okay.
the musician up there. She knows about the microphones.
Yeah. So we more respond to things rather than create things. And so I think what Evan's talking about is really rather remarkable because, and I think that this kind of goes to the real estate culture in general. I laughed when Evan described himself as being different because I also was in a situation where we were walking a whole bunch of folks from UMass Amherst through a space in one of his competing buildings, Tower Square, in downtown Springfield. And the real estate agent, the guy representing, was talking about not wanting to park on the streets of Springfield. And this is in front of these potential tenants who are going to rent 27,000 square foot of space, and he's talking about safety on the street. And I finally interrupted him because I was just so ticked off. I've had my business in Springfield since 1985. So I've kind of been around for a while. I've been downtown since 92. And I've never been mugged, I mean, like nothing has ever happened to me or any of my employees, in all those years. And I said, excuse me, but, I've been here since 92. I taught a class right around the corner from there. My students parked on Main Street. Nothing happened to them or their cars. I was furious. So to my mind, it is a cultural conversation that happens on a number of levels. It happens at the real estate level and the broker level. It happens at the political level, your local politicians. Later on, I hope we talk more about building officials and fire chiefs and people like that. But it's got to come from a lot of different places, and we're all part of that conversation, and I have to have that conversation with my employees. I have employees who live in the Happy Valley and don't live in Springfield, and the crap they say, I sometimes want to hurt them because it's counter to what they've experienced in the city. That's what's really, and we're speaking about Springfield, and I think Springfield is a slightly different thing, but I think you can transfer this conversation to a lot of different places.
Just two quick anecdotal things, and it's just Evan's really reminded me of this. I was in a convening recently with a man named Rick Lowe, who is the man who created Project Row House in Houston, Texas, which is a remarkable project if you're not aware of it. And Rick was saying he was with a private developer, a very wealthy private developer, and they were having a conversation, and they were talking about a particular community where Rick is beginning to help folks imagine that community differently. And the guy says, I'm really, really afraid to go to that neighborhood. There's so many people on the street. And Rick says, well, where do you live? And it's this really very wealthy community. Some of it's gated, I suppose, and all that. And Rick says, I'm really afraid to go to your community because there's nobody on the street. So just to Evan's point. And one more little quick anecdotal thing. I've done some work in Memphis. There's an amazing project going on in Memphis, Crosstown Arts and Crosstown Development in Memphis, Tennessee. And when I first got to Memphis, and they drove me around and we started talking about and kind of asset mapping and things like that, I noticed that the built environment was not cared for at all. So there's big holes in the fabric and the streetscape in certain parts of Memphis. And then they toured me around to meet different cultural workers in organizations. And I found, as I was talking to them, that they weren't even aware that 6 blocks on the road there was some complementary work happening, and there was a tremendous disconnect. And my first observation that I made to some of the planners and stuff in Memphis was, whether it stuck or not, I don't know, but it was an intuitive response, which says, I don't know what preceded what, but your carelessness with your built environment is reflected in the disconnect in your communities, right? Now, I don't know if there was a disconnect in the communities that allowed for this carelessness in terms of the built environment, or if things began to happen in the built environment and that sort of contributed to this disconnect amongst people. But they're associated, you know.
I'm making sure everyone does their homework, right? Plan a trip to AS220 and make sure that you now check out Project Row House online. Before I take questions, I want to give Seth a moment. And for people who don't know Easthampton, it's a quaint little town. Some might say when you drive through, but it's a really cool town. They've done a lot of great stuff about rehabbing some of their mill buildings. They also have places like Flywheel, which has been a really great music venue for it's got to be going on 20 years, I would think now, Flywheel. Maybe 15 years probably, 15. Give or take. And they also do stuff where they get the whole community involved in art projects where they paint cows and put them all over the city. I mean, it goes from,
Bears.
What was it?
Bears.
Bears, right. Bears. They paint the bears.
Cows is Vermont.
But so Seth, but my question to you, Seth, is we have a lot of artists who are buying buildings or getting investors, they want to be more in control, but how do you deal with the leadership and the confusion and the chaos of artists and the sort of open agenda in dealing with city officials? That's sort of what we want to talk about a little bit.
We have the really great thing about Easthampton is that the municipalities recognize that the arts and the creative culture that we have contributes to a huge part of the economy of Easthampton. And so Easthampton City Arts, for example, that Burns Maxey is the coordinator for, is partly funded by the municipalities. So she's actually a city employee, but a lot of the money that also comes in for her job so that she can keep it going is through fundraising 2 times a year. So it's kind of an interesting mix. When I started the Easthampton CoLab and everybody's got a little one sheet about what we're about, we just started having a conversation in May about what we wanted our co-work community-oriented space to look like. We went to Eastworks, which is a building owned by Will Bundy, who is very community-focused. He was very excited about our idea, basically let us squat in this room that eventually became our co-work space once a week, and we just brainstormed like crazy, found the right finance person to help us get the books in order, started having open houses to figure out what the fuck we were doing and who we were trying to be and what our membership model would look like. And I'm from Rhode Island, I swear all the time. So I'm surprised you didn't during your presentation. Good. So basically, there was already a support structure in place from one of the building owners who saw the need for what we were doing. We had a meeting with the mayor and the city planner who saw how we were also fulfilling a need. We work with ECA Plus as a partner as well, and we work with several other organizations on kind of low-key levels. We're also about to have a meeting of the minds with all of the different co-work spaces in the Pioneer Valley to sit down and say, how can we work together? How can we work with each other? We are not interested in being proprietary. We're very similar in the mind of what AS220 is doing, but on a micro level. We are very transparent in who we are, what we want to be. We're not making money at this point. We're a social enterprise. We're for profit. All the money goes back into our operations. But right now we're renting space. Eventually, we're looking at what Richard's kind of doing with the Northampton Arts Trust, where we put a building into a trust so that we can have that building in perpetuity so that things can't happen to that building to become conduized or a Trader Joe's or a Walmart or something else. We don't want Easthampton suffering from what happened to Northampton. Mm-hmm. Yes. We don't. We don't want that happening. And so like when you say quaint, that's a red flag to me. I don't want Easthampton being quaint. I want it being dirty. Mm-hmm. I want it being dirty. I want people to know that if they go to the Peter Pan bar, people are going to look at them funny, because they will. They'll say like, well, I didn't know they let UMass students in here. I mean, we've got people who have been there for generations, whose parents and grandparents worked at Stanley Home Products which is now Eastworks. So we want to have respect for the people who have been there for generations upon generations. We know that we are the first gentrifiers. The artists come in, and then people start, you say word like sustainability, and people are like, sustainability, we got to be sustainable. And then like everybody starts throwing around synergy and all of this shit, right? No, it's true. And then it becomes like co-opted. All of these words and the language and everything, it becomes co-opted. And instead of it having that kind of that force behind it, it's like, you could take AS220's manifesto and you could tear that to pieces and then, make it into something that just becomes corporatized. And you also know that something like AS220 doesn't have that going on itself, but it's just one of those things. Like DIY in the 90s, when I saw bands like Green Day at AS220, which I did in 1992 before they became shit, they were a do-it-yourself band on Lookout Records, and now DIY, Martha Stewart's saying DIY. Nobody knew what DIY was in 1991, but this is what happens. I'm done.
For now.
What is that? It's that balance of the townie mentality and the new people coming in. And I think that, I think if someone drove through Easthampton not knowing it, there'd be a different perception versus people who live in the area. Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, I also, I lived out west for 15 years. I lived through the first .com bubble in Oakland, and I got out before the second one happened. My wife's apartment, that was $900 when I was seeing her in 2004, is now $5,000 a month. So we do not want that shit happening anywhere around here. We have to protect our towns and our cities.
I think the balance is, and hopefully the next time we gather and convene, people at Gateway City Arts in Holyoke is sort of really trying to reach out to do this stuff, but also bring the community along. So they're working with, again, with teen groups, Girls Inc. to say, let's get the community involved. The people that walk by this building every day who don't feel welcomed into the art show when there's all these hipster looking, everyone's kind of hanging out drinking wine. Let's make sure that they are welcome into the building, and let's have that collaboration between new people coming in and people that have been there for a long time.
And a lot of that is having open dialogue and open conversation and having events that actually are beneficial to that community. Holyoke has a huge Puerto Rican population, so how do you make events that are specific so that people want to come out to that instead of like weird noise bands, which I want to go see, but how can we have an event that has two things happening at the same time? It's really important.
I know there's a question already. Wasn't there someone already had their hand up?
I was wondering about many things, but specifically, so you're walking down the street and you see this great building, which I do all the time. I live in Greenfield. And I think, oh my God, that would make a wonderful theater/gallery, cafe thing. How do I know if that is indeed true? I mean, because I didn't see it, but I don't know anything about it. So do I talk to you?
Sure.
Okay.
Done.
That was easy.
Yes.
Well, and you also talk to an architect. I mean,
But the other piece of that equation is the artist. I mean, as an artist myself, I'm like, I would so love to do that, but how?
But the architect brings in the grounding, the reality of the costs.
So,
and
so I'm the person that says no. Okay.
So I talk to him, so I get the yes, and I talk to him.
Right.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Then we don't
Yeah.
do it
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly. So I'm the one that's always the bearer of bad news.
You're the architect.
I'm the architect, okay? And so, and it's for your own good. I mean, when I hear your story about painting pipe, plastic pipe, I'm just like, oh my God, because if you ever got caught, you also destroy your relationship.
At that point, it didn't matter.
Okay, good. All right, all right. But later. So, it's gotten, I mean, the things you could do 30 years ago and the things you can do now, it's night and day different. I mean, you know how we've talked about the homogenization of the country? Well, it's happening here as well. And it's both a good thing and a bad thing. So building codes are becoming standard everywhere. It used to be Springfield had its own building code and Greenfield had its own building code, and it kind of recognized what was going on in those places. Well, then we got a statewide building code. Well, now we have national building codes with state amendments. And they are getting increasingly complex. There is a cost associated. Every change that they come up with is always more expensive. There's always a new requirement. And it's not just dealing with the building official, it's also dealing with the fire department. And politically, they are often at odds with each other. They've had some cat fight in 1902, whatever, that they will overrule each other. And so it creates a lack of a clear path. So doing any kind of a building in any kind of a space where you're trying to do something outside the norm requires a plan. And I don't just mean like an architectural plan, but a plan of attack, so to speak, for how you're going to look at it, how you're going to assess it, and when's the point when you say it's not going to work. And that's the hardest thing is, I fall in love with buildings. And so like I try to make it work, and sometimes you just have to say, no, this isn't the one, for a variety of reasons. And a lot of these spaces that we have here in New England have inherent problems. Yeah. Okay, they come with crap in the soils, they come with asbestos on the pipes, they come with asbestos on the roofs, they come with asbestos in the sheetrock. They come with all those things, and so you have to look at your funding sources, and it's just. And I'm not even I'm talking about like in the private world, once you start bringing in public money, it then changes everything. Yeah. And so
I want to add to that, because Kerry's the architect that did our code study in Holyoke, and that was exactly that point, is these building owners don't know where to go with the building. So this was us, the city, giving technical assistance to at least give them, okay, here are 3 scenarios. Yeah. And which one is possible in your mind for you financially? And even just doing one floor was some of the options that we did, so you can get some of your space activated, and not have to pay money just to find out how much more money you're going to have to pay.
If I was going to wave a magic wand, Aaron,
yes, okay.
At the state level,
yeah.
The magic wand. There's a lot of things I would change, but speaking to Jeff's comments, is if there was a small pool, and there is in the affordable housing world a small pool of technical assistance money that's available to people to do this kind of due diligence. And it's not all that expensive, but it's prohibitively expensive to an artist who has no money. Yeah. So $3,000 to $5,000 could buy you that kind of a survey that would tell you what you needed to do and give you a roadmap going forward. So if that money was easily available, it was, not a loan, but a grant, so you didn't have to worry about paying it back. That would be ideal. So, Aaron, make it so.
So we're working on that one.
All right.
I want to continue this part of the conversation. I just want to set the record straight on 2 things. It's bears in Easthampton, cows in New York. So now that I remember. Also want to
sneakers in Springfield.
Exactly, sneakers in Springfield.
Sneakers in Springfield.
And I think we should do like shad or maybe salmon in Holyoke. And Chicopee did airplanes. Exactly. The other thing I threw out there for people who are keeping notes, if you're interested in this sort of seeing a great example of how space was utilized and then changed, there's a movie called The Heretics. It's about women writers who started a magazine in the 70s, and they had loft space in the meatpacking district of New York, which they basically just co-opted and squatted and created this huge magazine. And then the code enforcement came in and said, you can't be doing this. But The Heretics is a really great documentary. The economics of space, that's what's being brought up, is, every building looks like a great space for a theater or a cafe or, a performance space or a gallery, but what's the cost? I know that my good friend Scott Riley here, who bought a building, is sort of dealing with that issue. And one of the questions I had, and Seth is in a different situation since you're in a building with someone that understands it. On the local level, I think it's figuring out, can you work with the local municipality to allow for, like you said, first, if we're going to bait the building, clean it up, but can we mothball the top 3 floors and just develop the first floor? Will the municipality let you do that? Will the municipality let you do the fire suppression and the fire upgrades over 3 or 4 years, as opposed to $50,000 to $100,000 to $200,000 sprinkler system all at once? That's the kind of issues I think that we need to work with municipalities to kind of let these things happen if we want to encourage development of these old buildings. Because unfortunately, and neither Evan or Kerry said this, but the unfortunate thing is that all of us see these old buildings, fall in love with them. It's a lot cheaper to tear it down and build a new building. And that's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah, there's also, I'm on the board of City Space, which overlooks Old Town Hall in Easthampton, where Flywheel is and East CA Plus is. But on the second floor was the community room where they used to have all of their gatherings and whatnot. And it's this beautiful, beautiful room with stained glass and da-da-da-da. And we're looking at making that into a multi-purpose performance space, but it's like a $3 million project. So we're in like phase 2 right now, where we're just kind of fixing up the lobby. But I mean, we have to have restrooms, which we don't have upstairs. We have to put an elevator in, which we don't have. So, and that's a city building. So then it comes with all of these other aspects like historical, city-owned, like all of these different things. And then, we're this nonprofit overlooking the tenants of the building. So can we apply for these grants with this if it's owned by that? So it becomes complicated, but luckily everybody wants to be a part of the conversation and figure that stuff out, put some CPA money towards things and whatnot. But also, with these falling in love things, you've got to be incredibly pragmatic. Like, do you have a team in place? Do you have people behind you who want to do it? Do you have any kind of financial health with that? Like, for example, if we have Jen Turner, who's our finance whiz and a member, she makes these spreadsheets. You put one number in when a new member comes in, it changes everything in the places it needs to change. It's like fucking magic. It's like, it's incredible. It's just like, it works now. And if we didn't have her, we wouldn't be able to do it, because my business partner and I, math is not our forte. And so, and just, the profit and loss. So we have a 3-year profit and loss, but we have a 5-year plan. We're about to talk about a 10-year plan, because I just realized we're going to spend $400,000 in rent in 10 years. And I don't want to do that. I want ownership. So like, what does that mean? Yep. Yes, exactly. So, and
that's the thing. City Hall has building space in our old City Hall in Holyoke that aren't utilized because they're not handicap accessible. And a lot of these codes were put in with the right intention of keeping public safety. They're not artists, they're not developers who are creating these codes. They've got one-track mind. They're not seeing the ramifications. I have a question here and here, so I'll go here and then here.
So, speaking of a grant at the state level to assess needs for a building, I just want to do a plug for the Cultural Facilities Fund, which is, the funding come up soon for another round, hopefully. And also another resource is mass.spacefinder.org for people who want to find space or post space, looking for artists, performance. I highly recommend it. There was recently a Globe article about a business owner, a rug business owner, who he has concerts in his space in the evening. It's he's a creative use of space, and so just those 2 resources I wanted to do.
Yeah, in general, also, I was the artist curator for Mass Space Finder for the western part of the state. And so there's almost 400 spaces that are on that database. And it's really amazing because you can search it in a way where you can say, like, I can only spend $15 an hour. I need wood floors. It has to have handicapped access, all that stuff, and then be able to find the spaces that you need. So a lot of spaces are on there now, but for spaces that aren't, if you know of them, you should send them to Mass Space Finder. They can set it up very, very easily. It's great. And also, that is a database that's put together by Fractured Atlas, my fiscal sponsor. Love them. And they have a Space Finder in New York, Space Finder in LA, and in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So it's starting to branch out to be able to look at it from that point of view, too. It's great. Thank you for saying that.
I have a little story to tell, and it's something that's happening right now in my city. And that is that, a while back when MGM was knocking at the door of Springfield, and along with some other casino development, I was thinking about how is that going to impact not just my real estate and my company, but also what is that going to do to the city? And I had already developed some, pretty strong feelings about the arts community and how that is important for Springfield. In fact, one of the things that I did, I mentioned to you that there's a gallery, and I should tell you that the artist who has the gallery and studio on the 9th floor of a Class A office building, which is a little bit unusual, but it works really well for the building. And on the other side of that hall, there's another 10,000 square foot fitness center. So on this 9th floor has got a lot of cool stuff going on. The fitness center is really hip sort of place with great views, and then across the hall, so you got mind, body, and spirit all there on one floor, and it's great for the building, it's great for downtown. But anyway, the point is that that before we developed this floor, we had 6 floors in this building that were completely empty. That's 20,000 square feet of floor. All the walls had been taken down. It was all open space, basically, because there was a business there, a call center that didn't need offices, any partitions. So it was all open. My friend John Simpson, who is a professor, an art teacher, and brilliant artist, was doing some exhibits with his students in the lobby of the building. And we were doing this collaboration where John's students were working with the Springfield Symphony. And Kevin Rhodes, the conductor, would work with the students, or at least tell them about their final performance of the year, where they were going to do a particular symphony, and that they were charged with creating works of art that were thematically tied to this performance. And then in the day of that performance, or the early evening, we would have a reception. And then they would go to the symphony and hear the music, and we would celebrate the art and show the art, and it was amazing, really great. We did that 3 years in a row, but the third year that we were doing this, a month before this event, John learned from the building department in Amherst that they had to condemn his studio at UMass, and that because they didn't have enough fire suppression. And they said he had to be out in 2 days. And he had 10 years worth of art. His students were finishing their senior projects. The performance that this art was all being kind of coordinated with was happening in about a month. And so he says, what do I do? I said, well, I've got space, there's no problem with that. Let's go take a look and see what we have. So first floor I went to, I don't think I ever walked on that floor before. It was dark. I didn't even know where the light switch was. And we fumbled around, and we turned on the lights eventually, and we walked around. And this was a nice big open space. And at the end of the space was a tile floor with sinks, which used to be a cafeteria. And it had a northern light, so it had beautiful light coming in. And I said, will this work? And he looked at me, and he almost started crying. He says, you mean I can have this? I said, yeah. I said, but on one condition, I want you to hang the works, all the paintings. I don't want this to be just a storage area. And that's how the gallery was created. And I can't tell you how that gallery has really made an impact, not just in the building, but in the downtown. So now, get back to MGM. They come over, because the CEO of MGM is an art history major and loved John's work. He could see it in the lobby, so we got him to come upstairs. And that started a conversation with him, with all of his senior people, about my vision for downtown. And what I wanted to make sure was that the MGM facility was not going to be sort of this giant sucking sound where every bit of energy in the downtown just goes into this black hole and stays there, and that the rest of the downtown just sort of falls away. I pointed out how walkable the city is, and I talked to him about all this public art stuff that I've been doing. I was behind the Sneaker Project and James Kitchen's metal works downtown, and I've opened up several different galleries downtown. And I said, if you look on this map, you can see how you can walk to all these places. And I said, we really want to cultivate a place here for artists to become economically viable and to create a walkable place. And on the economically viable part, that was the interesting thing. I told him, to Jim Murin, I said, what if you had these, you had artists' works installed and hung in all of the hotel rooms and common spaces in your hotel, and that would be for sale, and they could buy the robe in the closet, or they could buy the painting on the wall. It's all for sale, and we would create a maker space in the city, which is what I'm doing right now. And this idea launched, to the point where MGM put it in the response to the Gaming Commission's RFP that they want to partner with me. Now, they didn't even tell me that they were doing this until I read it in the RFP. And I said, oh, wow, I'm partnering with MGM on this thing. How the hell am I going to do this? I mean, that's a lot of capacity building to create that much artwork to fill a lot of rooms and to do that. But I'm here to tell you that it's going to happen. And so stay tuned to this channel.
We have some good artists in Holyoke you can utilize too, so, yes, sir.
So, hi, so I just want to get to something that's sort of Bert and Seth touched upon, and that's basically, like for creative workers to survive the creative economy, it comes to ownership. Like I'm sure AS220 would not be where it is now if you didn't own it. And this is what Seth is looking into. And so I'm sort of involved in something like that in North Clinton. What I want to get to though with Bert is that it becomes, what is the entity that owns? Like if there's nice, like this guy down in Dumbo, he was straightforward. He owned the buildings, he pulled the artists, the creatives in and said you can be here for 5 years and then you're going. So to protect space, it then becomes, what's the entity? And you said, in an offhand way, one of your buildings is land bank. So could you just expand on that? Like, what's that relationship? Who owns the building? Or how does that?
AS220, the nonprofit, owns the building, but as a nonprofit, we couldn't access federal tax credits, so we had to create limited liability corporation and with the partners with the tax credits and all that. We just closed out one of those deals. In fact, I'm sure Bank of America wouldn't be happy to have me publicizing this. We even managed to get them to forgive the buyout and a little bit of back priority return that had piled up a little bit, making a case that if they were really interested in the long-term viability of the organization, they would let us put that money into a replacement reserve, right? We won that battle. It wasn't easy. They don't want to set that precedent. So the nonprofit essentially owns all of the properties, right? The land banking right now is because we can't get to this building right now. So Rhode Island Housing agreed to land bank it because they have a program for land banking. Eventually we'll take it back and it's ours to take, so to speak. It's a temporary protection, and they have the infrastructure to keep an eye on it and that kind of stuff for the time being, while we're trying to get the Satin Doll finished and that kind of thing. This may be a little bit of a stretch from your question, but there's a couple of comments I want to make. You know, I don't know. I was born with a nose for money. I have a special smell thing. It shouldn't have to be that way, and this is what I mean, okay? So, as we all know in development, that really site control is when a project becomes real. You know, you can speculate all day long, but if you don't have site control, you don't have anything. It's really difficult to get the banks to take you serious or anybody until you have site control of a property. Sometimes opportunity, it comes, and you don't necessarily have all the puzzle pieces put together and stuff like that, but there's an opportunity like with this strip club to be able to gain site control of the property. So where do I go? In each and every one of our buildings, the city stepped up, okay, in bridge loans to get site control of the property. Right now, initially it started with what was called the Province Economic Development Partnership, a quasi thing, and some HUD monies went through there and a variety of different funding sources. But each of their funding mechanisms had some regulatory body, federal or state or city, that had something to do with those monies. And because Providence was Providence them days, and there was a lot of ward politics and a lot of weirdness, that money was doled out, and there were a tremendous amount of bad loans and everything. And the PDP under HUD scrutiny has now sort of become essentially non-functioning. Now this strip club comes online. Where do I go? I got to grab this building now, or it's going to go on the open market, and might be another club owner that takes it and whatever. Well, I find out that the PRA, the Province Redevelopment Agency, is somewhat liquid. None of their monies have any sort of regulatory barriers because it's second time around or third time around or whatever. Because of our cafe, the head of the PRA comes into our cafe all the time. We got talking, what's your next project? I said this. He goes, you know, Bert, we got a little cash. Oh, you got cash? he's given me, last night, the final bridge loan got approved last night from the PRA to give us a site control. We'll be able to close on the building. We passed a cultural bond that will be matched by that. That gives me some takeout money and also some development money. So, but the point I'm trying to make is here, the average artist who's trying to develop a property or a group of artists or organization of cultural workers, they don't know how to sniff that out necessarily. Why do I have to be that smart or wise to be able to find the money to make the project happen? And I give you a very, very quick example. Like, my brother used to do development here and there, and he did some in Austin, Texas. And he says, Bert, coming to Providence, it's like I'm annoying the building department when I go in there. It's like when I was in Austin, they took me in a back room. They brought everybody together, and they said, you want to invest in Austin? Well, let us help you get this done. And all the players were there. And said, okay, these are the obstacles, these are the challenges. So this idea of the kind of concierge service, which I was just in this current mayor's, I was a co-chair of his economic development transition team. And that was the highest priority for us, was this sort of concierge, a go-to person that helps mediate all of this, particularly for artists and culture people who are trying to make stuff happen. And there are cities that do it, and some do it better and some don't. But the idea that we have to decode this incredibly complex set of regulations and expectations is an absurdity if you expect anything to get done, So I just want to bring that up.
I'm assuming we have to be done. I wasn't here earlier. I was out playing state rep and then teaching yoga, and I got here. So I don't know if we have time for one more question or.
You guys don't mind missing 10 minutes of the next thing?
Oh, there's another thing. If people need to go, maybe are you guys want to hang out? Maybe just private conversations. I'm open. Is there times? Oh, we're getting the call.
Well,
the rep says the balls are deflated. You got to go.
We'll talk with you privately.
Yeah, please come around. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panel.
I don't know.
All of our productions at GCTV are brought to you in part by People's United Bank, 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. C&S Wholesale Grocers is hiring in Hatfield and Brattleboro. Go to weselectthebest.com or click on the link at gctv.org for employment opportunities. The Arbors at Greenfield, assisted living community providing a unique balance of independence and personal care that offers residents and families the most precious gift of all, peace of mind. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com and check them out on Facebook. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. gcc.mass.edu. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield, call them at 774-3191, or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Franklin Community Co-op. Visit them at 144 Main Street in Greenfield or go online to franklincommunity.coop. Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all the productions at Greenfield Community Television.